Alrighty, y'all. We're probably going to need to talk about Sanguivore. Why do we need to talk about Sanguivore? Well, since the patch notes came out where they are massively buffing the amount of additive damage on the weapon, I've been inundated with people asking, are we finally going to use Sanguivore on a minion build? Does this finally save the sword? And basically 1 in every 5 Reddit posts right now are talking about how Sanguivore is somehow going to be the saviors of minions. Well, first and foremost, Minions is like 3rd or 4th strongest Necromancer build this season. It's already cleared pit tier 98. With these changes, we'll absolutely clear pit tier 100. And I promise you, it's not going to be using Sanguivore. But the sword itself kind of lies to you. It makes you think that it's made for minions. And I put out a whole video that I'll go ahead and link right here during the PTR, where I explained how Sanguivore just literally is not a minion sword. It's only an Army of the Dead sword. But that's not been good enough, clearly, because we're still getting questions. People are still, percolating throughout the community asking about this. And I'm kind of afraid that at some point somebody's going to run an Army of the Dead build and make you believe that it's a good minion build. And it's not. I'm going to save you from being lied to by some charlatan in the future. So let's go ahead and mathematically break down why Sanguivore is trash for your minion build. Walking into this season, I'd already put out my own golem variant for a minion build for you to use during the season. On max roll, we currently recommend a mages only build because that is just literally the strongest version of minions. But I refuse to play without a golem. Luckily for you, though, you Sanguivore enjoyers out there, me playing with a golem is one of the few reasons why you could almost make an argument for this thing. But I promise, again, I'm going to prove to you that you shouldn't. I had the build guide here. I guess I'll link this down below. And what I basically did was that I retrofitted this to now include Sanguivore. Now, there are going to be a lot of changes coming to minion builds because on the best version of a minion build, the grandfather sword isn't going to be the best in slot anymore. But that being said, let's go ahead and compare what it was to what Sanguivore is going to be with a literal, perfect, best version of Sanguivore, giving it its only saving grace of potentially scaling your damage with a GA triple masterwork crit on masteries here for all of your various minions on a 12 out of 12 masterwork weapon. And let's break down how these stats change build to build. Now, while I could try to waste your time, get myself a few more views, and give you one of the classic, the last result is gonna blow your mind style of clickbait, that's the answer right there. That number right there down in the bottom underneath the green there, or at least on the right if you happen to be colorblind, it's just quite literally 53% less damage using Sanguivore if you do all the math. There you go. You don't have to watch the rest of the video. But if you're interested to understand how we got there, let me walk you through it. For minion builds, the largest, and it's not even vaguely close, but the largest total contributor to your damage is Ring of Men Down. Now, I could get into the nitty gritty about the individual weapon scaling damages of one minion versus another minion versus your golem, etc. But let's just use the nice, clean Ring of Men Down here as the basis of our damage. There are a couple other things to understand, which is that like your base minion damage can overpower, but Ring of Men Down can't overpower. And even with Zan Rune and things like that, you can't make them overpower. Let's ignore all that for a real quick hot second, and let's just break down the math. Let's use Ring of Men Down as the base here. Base damage for both of these is going to be the same because Sanguivore and Grandfather are both two-handed swords. So their literal base damage that everything scales off of is exactly the same. Then we need to talk about the differences in aspects which are available on your character. Because ostensibly with Sanguivore, you're going to be using Army of the Dead. Now, get this out of your mind right now. Army of the Dead is not going to actually do a legitimate amount of damage on this build because you're trying to buff your minions as fast as possible, as often as possible. And oddly enough, waiting around to consume 20 corpses just to be able to get Army of the Dead to do a little bit more damage is not worth the damage loss. Because in using Army of the Dead, you're able to use the aspect Unyielding Commander. Unyielding Commander is an incredibly powerful aspect. The only downside here is that Sanguivore, as far as its aspect is concerned, does not increase your minions' damage. So you're gaining an aspect that's very strong, but you're losing an aspect because the weapon itself doesn't increase minion damage or Mendeln damage. Versus Golem, where the Grandfather is going to double all of your damage when you crit. Since you have a 100% chance to crit, you're going to double your damage 100% of the time. Not only that, we do regain an aspect here, and that we get to use something like Reanimation. And on top of that, Soul Rift itself grants you a 75% damage multiplier. So when you compare the two multi-lists against one another for the gear that we're wearing, both of them are wearing Air Perdition for a 60% multi, Fist of Fate for a 50.5% damage multi. We both have Blood Moon Breaches for a 50% chance multi there. Both of them have Grasping Veins for another 50% multi. The difference here in Unyielding Commander being a 2.65 versus Reanimation on your Amulet, which is only a 1.68. The base weapon doesn't do anything, but Grandfather doubles your damage. Okay, great. Those are the aspect multis out of the way. The ultimate multi, Army of the Dead, does not increase your minions' damage, but Soul Rift will grant you a 75% damage multi. The big difference here, though, the thing that's basically been argued as the reason to use Sanguivore, at the very least for leveling, which is a completely ridiculous statement once you think about this, is in how many mastery ranks each one grants you. Because without Sanguivore, you're going to have a total of 15 ranks to Skeleton Warrior, you're going to have 9 ranks to Skeletal Mage, and you're going to have 13 ranks to Golem Mastery. And this is where I see people get tripped up the most. Because Sanguivore is going to bring you up to 25 ranks to Golem, it's going to bring you up to 21 ranks of Mage Mastery, it's going to bring you up to 27 ranks of Warrior. The issue being that people seem to analyze this in a vacuum. They go, look at how many ranks this is, but you need to compare it against how many ranks you had previously to figure out how much of a damage increase it is. So while it's not completely fair, it's not a complete picture of the damage differences here. I took the average total mastery. And while your warriors are going to do different damage than your mages, and they're going to do different damage than your golem for their base attacks, for the Ring of Mendeln damage, they all have the same base. Then their damage multipliers scale it further. So taking the average when we're considering Mendeln is completely fair. With 12 total ranks from Sanguivore, which would require you to have a GA and triple masterwork crit this weapon to be able to enjoy it. That's why it's kind of ridiculous to consider this like a leveling option for any class, would net you an average of 483% average damage multiplier or a 5.83 multi. And without these ranks in it, you're sitting at a pretty 3.43 or a 243% damage multiplier. Now, the difference here, just to give you an idea of like how much stronger one of these is than the other one, these 12 ranks in Sanguivore is netting you a 70% increase in damage for your minions. And that's where a lot of people think that you're going to come out on top. You're going to net more bonus damage. But again, I promise you, you're not going to get there, sadly. We have to look at a very minor thing that I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily consider, which is the Reaper's Pursuit multiplier, which you have. Because Reaper's Pursuit is going to grant you additional damage per darkness skill on your skill bar. And if you are using Army of the Dead, which is not a darkness skill, you have Golem, you have your Raised Skeleton, you have your Grasping Veins, you only have room for 2 other shadow skills. Now that being said, on the Grandfather version of it, you only gain 1 more, but the difference between a 1.24 multi and a 1.16 multi is actually fairly large. So if we were to do the same math here of just like how much damage increase that is, that alone is a 7% total damage increase of your build. Not quite the 70% from the mastery, but you can see how these little nickel and dime differences are probably going to make up the large difference in the end. You have a very minorly different amount of intelligence using one sword versus the other one. And then here is where the patch notes might make you think that it's going to win out on additive damage. Sadly, it's just not going to. Because Sanguivore originally granted you 60 summoning additive damage, and summoning tag is not only on Army of the Dead, and now with the Vampiric Souls, which do absolutely no damage and don't matter. But that being said, does apply to your minions as well. You might think that 400 additive damage on your weapon is a lot of additive damage, until you remember that you're a fully built out character with glyphs and gear. You have thousands of additive damage, and that's mostly ignoring overpower because you're using essence glyphs. So your build is going to have 427 critical strike damage. You're going to have a natural 152 overpower damage, even not considering the additional that you get from maximum life and fortify. You're already going to have 210 additive damage to vulnerable damage. You're already going to have 320 additive damage to summoning damage. And on the Sanguivore version, yes, this is going to bump up to around 700, but we already have stuff like 320 all damage, and that number goes even higher when we're considering the Grandfather, which nets you a total of an additional 585 additive damage in just this one stat alone. And you go even further, you have some additive damage for your warriors and your golem, as well as your mages. You'll have damage to elite monsters, you'll have damage versus healthy, you'll have damage while healthy, you'll have damage while fortified. So all of those things considered, in the fact that, again, Grandfather literally just has more additive damage than Sanguivore has. Just hard stop, more damage on this weapon. So when we consider the total additive bonus, the difference between Grandfather and Sanguivore, which again, remember, Grandfather literally just adds more additive damage than Sanguivore does. Grandfather comes out with 32 times multiplier or 3,230 additive damage, and Sanguivore only comes out with a 29.5 multiplier, that is 2,950 additive damage. So it is about 300 less additive damage, and that's, again, without Masterwork critting on damage on the Grandfather at all. It's just less damage. And when you do the math at the end, that's how you get to the different number. Total average damage for Grandfather, let me do the math, boop, 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 132,316,815. And for Sanguivore, you have a whopping 85,939,064. Which one's bigger? The number on the right. How much bigger is it? 54%. Just looking at these two things and what is impacted by them. Grandfather ends up being 54% more damage than Sanguivore in its best case scenario with a triple Masterwork crit on the only stat that matters for the build, and that's when you realize Sanguivore isn't for minions, and we should just stop trying to use it on the build. It's only for Army of the Dead, that's its only purpose. And I gotta be honest with you, it's kind of upsetting. The Sanguivore Blade of Zir was sold to us as a minion sword. I'm not confused why so many people are confused. The devs themselves said this is an awesome minion sword, and it just isn't. It's just not a minion sword. Army of the Dead is not used on minion builds. If you're going to use this skill, you build into it itself and you sacrifice all of your other minions to gain multipliers for it. The idea of Army of the Dead in minions has not been interconnected for a very, very long time. And if you were going to try to make a minion build that would do the most damage possible, you would never use a unique item, no matter how many mastery points they put on it, that doesn't allow you to put an aspect on your build that increases minion damage. This is basically an issue with how the game currently only allows you to scale one thing's damage. This sword doesn't say your minions deal double damage. It says Army of the Dead deals double damage. It doesn't say gain a damage multiplier for your minions. It says gain a damage multiplier for Army of the Dead. If we ever get away from one skill deals double damage affix and multipliers being specific to individual skills, maybe Sanguivore could make a use case for a minion build. But this is where we ended up. Now, that being said, again, minion builds, rejoice. Reanimation is going to be used on a two-handed now. We're not even going to use Grandfather, which is pretty sick. Skeleton Priest getting a huge multiplier allows us to use Blood Getters on the build again for an additional multiplier. So look forward to this build guide being updated on Maxroll. Sirach is the one who is writing it. I myself am going to be testing it as well when this all goes live, so you'll be able to watch that live streamed, and we can try to pin this thing down and figure out where minions end up. I think it's going to be at pit tier 100 as a minimum. It's definitely talking about like perfect gear and pushing as hard as you can. Like, I'm not saying everybody's just going to waltz in there, but as far as what the build can do, that puts it promptly into A tier, very much an A tier build. In fact, better than some of the other builds that we kind of thought were going to be in the A tier and ended up not quite making the cut. So shoutouts to minions. You're really good now. The only issue being that you still can't target with it. And until I'm no longer a Diablo partner and I no longer play this game, I'm going to ask for that functionality to be added every single season and every single PTR and every single opportunity I get to talk to the devs until it either happens or they boot me out. So let's see whether or not I can be successful with that. But thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that it goes a long way to be able to alleviate some of this confusion, kind of put a final touch on a little kiss of death to this thing, a little coup de grace on the topic of conversation of whether or not Sanguivore is for your minion build. It isn't. If this is your first time at the channel, I promise you I'm not typically this dour. I'm not typically this down on hype. You can go check out my other videos. I'm generally pretty excited about things. But, you know, if you enjoyed this analysis, if you appreciated the breakdown, subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you. And go ahead and leave a comment down below. If A, you think I did any of my math wrong. B, you think I've missed something. C, you want to just kind of commiserate with the fact that the sword isn't for minions. Or D, you want to chit chat about anything else. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.